Daniel chapter 8. Do you ever have a hard time or trouble measuring things up so you can cut them? As I pondered that question, my mind went to the pizza joint. Sometimes we'll order pizza and I'll leave when I order and I get there and it's just coming out of the oven. And I know it's routine for them, but I don't know that they know how to measure the cut. I mean, they just grab their thing and whop, 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 and throw it in the box and out I go. And when I get home, now there's generally 5 in our family, so 3 girls, 2 boys, and I'll get a piece and it's like that big, and I'm thinking Michael and Brian right there. Here's Mom. here's Emily. But if they would just do their job, it'd all come out just right. Sometimes, I don't know about you, but people have trouble measuring up in order to cut a pie. Now, if you only have 4, that's easy. Cut it in 4s, cut it in 8s. Those are good. But when you have 5 in the family, you have to be a little more careful or someone's going to be crying out, "That's not fair." You got to be careful when you do that. How about cutting wood? This is the time of year that sticks and wood's going to be out on the side of the road, and sometimes I'll see people, they're going around and they're collecting little small logs because what they're doing is they're going to cut it up and have wood for their fire pit. And you know, when they cut it, they have to measure it up just right because too long won't fit and too short burns up too quickly. So they measure it. They have to make sure that it's just right. Some people say that they do that when you're a diamond cutter. Now, I've never seen a diamond cutter. They say a real professional diamond cutter will give scrutiny to the diamond before he ever makes the first cut. Because once it's broken, a false slip can ruin that diamond. Now we've come into Daniel chapter 8. I don't think I have any jeopardy of ruining anything this morning, but quite frankly, as I considered this chapter, I sat down and pondered for a long time, how are we going to cut this chapter up in order to understand it? To give meaning to it and to do it in a way that is not too heavy, too hard, but not too short, but one that's kind of just right. And I think, or I hope we can manage it today. I'm going to do it in one sermon. And it's going to involve a lot of symbolism, a lot of strange things. The title I've given it: the ram, the goat, and the little horn. So without further, let's just read this chapter in its entirety, just so we can get a context. Daniel chapter 8, verse 1. In the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared to me, Daniel, after that which appeared to me at the first. And I saw the vision, and when I saw, I was in Susa, the citadel, which is the province of Elam. And I saw in the vision, and I was at the Ulai canal, and I raised my eyes and saw, and behold, a ram standing on the bank of the canal. It had 2 horns. Both horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last. I saw the ram charging westward and northward and southward. No beast could stand before him, and there was no one who could rescue from his power. He did as he pleased. He became great. And as I was considering, behold, a male goat came from the west across the face of the whole earth without touching the ground. And the goat had a conspicuous horn between his eyes. He came to the ram with the 2 horns, which I had seen standing on the bank of the canal, and he ran at him with his powerful wrath. I saw him close to the ram, and he was enraged against him, and struck the ram and broke his 2 horns, and the ram had no power to stand before him, but he cast him down onto the ground and trampled on him. There was no one who could rescue the ram from his power. Then the goat became exceedingly great, but when he was strong, the great horn was broken, and instead of it, there came up 4 conspicuous horns towards the 4 winds of heaven. out of one of them came a little horn, which grew exceedingly great towards the south, towards the east, towards the glorious land. It grew great even to the host of heaven. And some of the host and some of the stars it threw down to the ground and trampled on them. It became great, even as great as the prince of the host. The regular burnt offering was taken away from him. The place of his sanctuary was overthrown. And a host will be given over it together with the regular burnt offering because of the transgression. And it will throw truth to the ground, and it will act and prosper. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to the one who spoke, "For how long is the vision concerning the regular burnt offering, the transgression that makes desolate, and the giving over the sanctuary and the host to be trampled underfoot?" He said to me, "For 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary shall be restored to its rightful state." When I, Daniel, had seen the vision, I sought to understand it. And behold, there stood before me one having the appearance of a man. And I heard a man's voice between the banks of the Uli, and it called, "Gabriel, make this man understand the vision." So he came near where I stood. And when he came, I was frightened and fell on my face. But he said to me, "Understand, O man, that the vision is for a time of the end." And when he had spoken to me, I fell into a deep sleep with my face on the ground. But he touched me and made me to stand up. And he said, "Behold, I will make known to you what shall be at the latter end of the indignation, for it refers to the appointed time of the end. As for the ram that you saw, the two horns, these are the kings of Media and Persia. The goat is the king of Greece. The great horn between his eyes is the first king. And as for the horn that was broken, in place of which 4 others arose, 4 kingdoms shall arise from his nation, but not with his power. And at the latter end of their kingdom, when the transgressors have reached their limit, a king of bold face, one who understands riddles, shall arise. His power shall be great, but not by his own power. And he shall cause fearful destruction, and shall succeed in what he does, and destroy mighty men and the people who are the saints. But his cunning he shall make a deceit prosper under his hand, and in his own mind he shall become great. Without warning he shall destroy many. He shall even rise up against the prince of princes. He shall be broken, but by no human hand. The vision of the evenings and the mornings that has been told is true, but seal it up, the vision, for it refers to many days from now. And I, Daniel, was overcome and lay sick for some days. Then I arose and went about the king's business, but I applied by the vision and did not understand it. I was appalled by the vision and did not understand it. Let's begin with this. Daniel 8 fits within the context of Daniel 7. Did you understand what we just read? Well, it's not something that is different apart from what we've already considered in a different chapter. That this chapter really is fitting within the context or underneath Daniel's prophecy of Daniel chapter 7. Now, if you remember there, that was the one that was dealing with 4 different beasts. There was a lion with wings that lined up with Babylon. There was a bear with ribs in its mouth that was Medo-Persia. There was a leper with 4 heads that was representing of Greece. And then there was a beast that was unlike anything that Daniel had known, and that one represented Rome. But at the end of time, out of the ashes of Rome, was going to come a little small future king that was going to ultimately be the Antichrist that would come. Do you remember that? He's the one that would be in power when Christ Jesus comes. He's the one that would ultimately be defeated at the Battle of Armageddon. And what we have in Daniel 7 is really a time frame of where Daniel is in Babylon all the way out to the latter end when Christ comes and the end times are there. That is Daniel chapter 7. Out of that time, there's coming an evil, satanically empowered ruler that really is making war against God, but because he can't war against God himself, he will make war against God's people. And God is really using that vision to help us to see that throughout time, whether it's past time, present time, or even future time, there will be evil people who will come and go. Potentates that shake their fist at God, mocking God and His people, persecuting them, that ultimately they are small representations of the greater one who is to come at the end times. There will be lots of antichrists that will make their way on the scene of history, but ultimately their defeat is sure and Christ will reign. That's Daniel 7. That's his vision that we found there. And what we noted about Daniel 7 is that's the forest view. It's like we're standing on the cliff and we're looking out at the land and we're seeing the forest of time from Babylon all the way to the end. Forest view. When we come to Daniel chapter 8, we're no longer looking at that forest view. We're now entering into the forest. We're going to look at some of the trees, some of the details of what Daniel had picked up on in Daniel chapter 7. It's embedded. This vision is embedded in Daniel chapter 7. It's going to give glimpses of really what that ultimate Antichrist will look like, what he will be. And it seems to me that what this vision of Daniel chapter 8 is doing is really helping us to see that Satan is ongoing in his war, but Satan is failing in his attempts to bring about the champion that he is ultimately trying to bring. He hasn't found the right person. He hasn't found the right ability yet to bring about that Antichrist. In some ways, as I studied this chapter, I thought of Looney Tunes and Wile E. Coyote. Did you ever watch Looney Tunes? Here you have Wile E. Coyote. He's after the Roadrunner, and the guy is always subscribing to the Acme products. Now, I don't know who Acme is, but that place should have been out of business long ago. Their traps never worked, did they? But the cartoon was all about this coyote that would always come up with a plan, super genius. The plan would fail. He'd go back to the drawing board and come up with another plan. As I studied Daniel 8, I thought, that really is in some ways a picture of the devil. He's always warring against God. He's always trying to get God. He can't get God, so he's going to get his people. And when he fails, when God foils him, he goes back to his drawing board and he tries to find another tactic, another person, another angle, another way to win his war. And when we come to Daniel chapter 8, what we find is that he's experimenting, looking for the Antichrist. And with every failed attempt, he's going to craft something more sinister, more heinous, more in his own desires. That's chapter 8. That even though he's constantly warring against God, he never wins. Okay? I think what you find is a ram, a goat, a little horn really are pictures of what an Antichrist ultimately will be. So, who is the ram? The goat, the little horn. The ram represents world dominance. We see him in verse 3, I raised my eyes and I saw and behold a ram standing on the bank of the canal. It had two horns and both horns were high, but one was higher than the other. The higher one came up last. I saw the ram charging westward, northward, southward. No beast could stand before it, There was no one who could rescue from his power. He did as he pleased and became great. Who is this ram? Well, we don't have to look too far. This ram is Medo-Persia. We know that definitely because Gabriel tells Daniel that. Look down in verse 20. As for the ram that you saw with the two horns, they are the kings of Media and Persia. So there's no guesswork here. There's no trying to figure out the symbolism here. We know that this ram represents two nations. One is the nation of Media, one is the nation of Persia. Now, in Daniel's day, these two nations are there, but they're very tiny. But there's coming a day that they're going to form a union, and Media is going to be the gigantic of the two countries in that union. But over time, Persia is going to take over, and it's going to become greater than Media. That's why you find the horn, one that came up last, is taller than the other. Daniel's getting all this, but Daniel doesn't know about Media and Persia yet. It's all future to him. I think it's interesting that when Cyrus does come on the scene, the Medo-Persians, they adopt a ram to be their mascot. And wherever they went into battle, the ram was its symbol. Now Daniel's writing, there's no Medo-Persia yet. They're still smaller nations. But when they do come, they're going to come and no one is going to stand in their way. Whether it's the north, the south, the east, the west. There are three gigantic world powers in their day. There's Babylon, that's what Daniel's in. There's Egypt, we know where that is. And there's a place called Lydia that's more of the Asia Minor. Those are the three kingdoms that rule the world. And when Medo-Persia comes in, they're going to take all of them. They are going to control all of the world. World domination. Cyrus is going to come. He's going to conquer them all. No one is going to stand against them. Now, history records for us that Cyrus did good things for God's people. But Medo-Persia also was capable of evil things against God's people too. For example, Isaiah 44. That names Cyrus as the leader who's going to come as the dominant power that's going to set God's people free. Now, Isaiah is going to be writing hundreds of years before Daniel, and he's going to name Cyrus as the one who's going to free the people to go back to the land. And sure enough, it's Cyrus that allows them to do that. Cyrus does great things for the people of God, but we have another book, Esther, that's going to record some great evil things against the people of God. For Esther is going to speak of a wicked man by the name of Haman who is going to attempt to annihilate the Jews. I would contend that Haman's rise to power, Haman's hatred for the Jews, really was not contained within himself. I would contend that Haman is really empowered by and influenced by the devil himself. And he's early. He's the first attempt that the devil is going to use to war against God and rid the planet of God's people. You think about the book of Esther, and it's right in the context of Medo-Persia, and here you have a man who really has risen up to become the second in charge. And he loves the authority, he loves the pride, he loves the accolades. And when he finds out that Mordecai will not bow down to him, that Mordecai will stand up against him, he hates Mordecai and he attempts to rid the world not just of this man, this stubborn thorn in my flesh. No, he sets out to annihilate all of Mordecai's people. Haman, though, has a problem. He's not the king. He's the number one of the king, but he's not the king. And what you find is that God is going to work through that book and show us that there is even the thwarting of the devil's power by raising up a little Jewish girl, an insignificant nobody. And he's going to make her queen so that Haman is foiled. And the devil cannot annihilate God's people. He loses his war. He loses his battle. Wile E. Coyote goes back to the drawing board to craft a new Antichrist. He thought world domination would give him that ability, because in a society that's dominated by the world, where could they escape? Nowhere. We've got him. We had him up until the queen interferes. So the devil learns, world domination is important, but I've got to have all power. So we find that he raises up another group. You find this goat, and it's going to represent all power. Not just world domination, all power, absolute power. Look at verse 5. I was considering, behold, a male goat came from the west. It's coming from Greece. Coming across the face of the whole earth while touching the ground. The goat had a conspicuous horn between his eyes. He came to the ram with the two horns, which I had seen standing on the bank of the canal, and he ran at him with a powerful wrath. I saw him come close to the ram, and when he was enraged against him, he struck the ram and broke his two horns. The ram had no power to stand before him, but he cast him down to the ground and trampled on him. There was no one who could rescue the ram from his power. Then the goat became exceedingly great, but when he was strong, the great horn was broken. Instead of it came there four conspicuous horns towards the winds of heaven. Notice verse 6. He, the goat, ran at him, the ram, in his powerful wrath. Verse 7 says the ram had no power to stand before him. We wrestle not against flesh and blood. And I would contend that the devil, again, goes back to his secret lair. He plots, he plans a new way to overcome God. World dominance seems to be the trick, but he's powerless to overcome the queen. So let's use world dominance and a powerful ruler. When he's ready, he hatches his plot. Greece is raised to a power. Off the scene go the Medes and the Persians. Verse 21 says that the goat is the king of Greece. The great horn between his eyes is the first king. That would be Alexander the Great. Alexander is one who has an intense hatred for Medo-Persia. History records that with fierce speed, he defeated Darius in the Battle of Gaugamela in 331 BC. He was outnumbered, but his hatred for these people kept him in the battle. And before it was over, Greece was now on top of the world. There was a world domination that Greece had. No one could resist him. But history tells us that God used Greece for some great good as well. That when Greece takes over, Greece has developed its culture. Greece has developed its art. Aristotle's one that was a teacher of Alexander the Great. And Alexander the Great has not just world dominance in his mind, he has the idea of connecting the world to be Greek, to the point that he unites the world with one language, Koine Greek. The Bible is written today. We have Bibles in Greek, and they are Koine Greek. God used that. Now, the world looked at it for advancement opportunity. We look at it as a spread of the gospel, because God's going to use one language, common Greek, and Roman roads that united the world for the spread of the gospel, so that when the church is born in Acts chapter 2, the disciples can literally take the word to the world without any kind of roadblocks. They can go all through the world, and they can speak the same language. God did that. God's providence provided that. But the devil had used this time as well. And the history of the Greeks, full of trouble. The problem is there's not enough time for Alexander to be the tool to be the next Antichrist, that he dies the very next year, ripe old age of 33. That's recorded in verse 8. When he's strong, the great horn was broken, and instead of it, there came up 4 conspicuous horns towards the wind of heaven. Satan has no power over death. Cannot control death. Alexander dies before he can be used. So, the devil goes back to the drawing board and realizes that there's embedded in man a frailty of life. Revelation tells us that when the Antichrist, the final Antichrist comes, he's going to be given powers to heal fatal wounds. But it's too late for Alexander. He's dead. Alexander's 4 generals divide his kingdom into 4 different divisions. The most 2 important ones are the Ptolemies down in Egypt and the Seleucids really over there in Syria and Asia Minor. Those are the 2 major ones that battle one another. Eventually, what you find is that the Seleucid power attacks the Ptolemies down in Egypt, and a little horn rises up in the glorious promised land of Judea. That little horn was major indeed. A little horn represents a cultural influence. Verse 9, out of one of those horns, came a little horn which grew exceedingly great towards the south, towards the east, towards the glorious land. Everyone recognized this to be Antiochus Epiphanes, who came to power in 175 BC. Antiochus was an evil, evil man. He is one who's a little horn because he was insignificant. Nobody knew who he was. He conned his way into the power. He lied his way into power. He murdered his way into power. But somewhat like Hitler, somebody who was insignificant finds a foothold, and all of a sudden becomes the dominant power of the East, becomes the dominant power of the world. That is Antiochus Epiphanes. And when he comes, he now takes over control of Judea, the glorious land, and he insists that all people must adopt not just the common language, they must adopt the culture of Greece. And you would become Greek through either choice or force. You would either adopt it or you would die. What Daniel is reporting is that these events would happen when he takes over Jerusalem, and they did happen in 167 BC. The first thing that Antiochus does in Jerusalem is has the high priest murdered and then replaced. The new high priest is very sympathetic to the Greek Hellenization. Now, Hellenization just means the adaptation of the Greek culture. And Antiochus insisted that the Jewish people put away the law of Moses, put away their culture of being God's people, and that they would accept the pagan practices of the Greek culture. They would do that or they would die. There was a resistance. The faithful Jews who refused, they were killed. They were slaughtered. Verse 10 says that this horn grew great, even in the host of heaven, and some of the stars threw down to the ground, trampled them. It became great, even as great as the prince of the host. And what that's referring to is, here's a guy who thinks himself as God. He has coins that are made, and on the inscription of those coins read the words Theos Epiphanes, God manifest Epiphanes. Even his soldiers called him a madman. When the Jews resisted, he not only tortures them, not only beats them, not only murders them, he enters into the temple and he stops the burnt offerings. He stops the sacrifices that are there. He literally steals the treasures out of the temple. He then sets up a statue of Zeus and tells them to worship this statue, slaughters a great number of Jews, and then offers pigs on in the temple on the altar, requires the Jews to eat pork, and forces the pork right down the throats of the Jewish priest. It was defilement upon defilement. Dark days. It's also days of resistance. This is the intertestamental time. If you have heard of a set of books called the Apocrypha, you'll find that in the Apocrypha are 1st Maccabees and 2nd Maccabees that just really talk about this revolt. And at the end of this revolt, you find that Epiphanes dies. He's not a normal man. He's another pawn used by demonic forces. And we see that in verse 23. At the latter end of their kingdom, when the transgressions have reached their limit, a king of bold face who understands riddles shall arise. That's Antiochus. His power should be great, but not by his own power. See, he's charged. He's empowered by something that's really not of himself. He shall cause fearful destructions and succeed in what he does, destroying mighty men, the people who are the saints. By his cunning he shall make deceit prosper under his hand, and his own hand shall he become great. Without warning he shall destroy many, and he shall rise up against the prince of princes. Again, what you find is that Antiochus Epiphanes, tool in the hand of Satan to persecute God and his people, fail. Verse 25 says that he shall be broken, but by no human hand. The man does die. He dies in Iraq, contracting painful diseases. He literally just rots away. His kingdom crumbles with him. Now, as the Jews, we can read about the Seleucid Empire. We can read about the victory they had. But one of the things that marked their victory over Antiochus Epiphanes is something they still celebrate today. On December 25th, 162 BC, they reconsecrated the temple, and they've been celebrating Hanukkah ever since. It's all going back to history a long time ago. And that's the vision that Daniel saw. And we read through that. I've tried to race through that, tried to not bore you with that. But I look at that and I think this question: so what? I live in 2024. Why does it matter? Why do I need to know what happened way back there in history, predicted by Daniel? Who cares? Why do we care about that particular time in history? And I have 3 reasons to conclude with. So if you've been asleep, wake up for just a few minutes. Here's why we should care. Because number 1, we can look back at history and see how God's people have always been persecuted. Sometimes when persecution comes, when troubles and trials that are on the heels of who we are, many people will ask this question: why? Or they'll go even a little further and say, why me? And that's somewhat of a selfish question. I'm just going to pause there for a minute because if there's something that's troubling and I say, why me? I'm really giving the indication, I don't care if it happens to you. I just don't want it to happen to me, right? But oftentimes when trouble comes, when trials in our heels, the question is, we ask, why? And that's not the question we should ask. The question we should ask is, why not more? Because history has always seen God's people at war. History has always shown God's people to be persecuted, and it's telling us that they will always be persecuted, not just in the past, but also in the future. It's not always constant. Think about Daniel 8 in the context. The time between Cyrus and Alexander is about 200 years. There's peace there for Israel. The time between Alexander and Antiochus is about 150 years. There's peace there in Israel. It's not always constant persecution. There are waves, there are pockets of peace, but really, this prophecy is teaching us that war is always raging against God. And the devil keeps failing. And he keeps going back to tweak his plans, and then another ruler's going to arise. So, should it surprise us when the next one shows up? Does it surprise us when we find people like Hitler or Mussolini taking similar actions like we'd read in the past? Does it surprise us that Haman rises up and tries to annihilate, Antiochus tries to annihilate, Rome with Nero and his craziness tries to annihilate? God's people have always been persecuted. There's another one coming. When is he coming? We don't know. But he's on his way. And if anything, we could look at history and see the truth of 1 John 2:18, where John says, there have been many antichrists that have come, and there will be more. All the way up to the end, when that last great persecutor of God's people will come. Why does this prophecy matter? It matters because we look back to see what happens so that we can prepare for what's to come. And being prepared means that we are faithful. We don't know exactly when it's going to come. So, in the time of peace, while we wait, in the time that we have that is freedom of ours, give the gospel. The time that we have peace, encourage God's people to be faithful to Him, to give service to Him. In times that we have, recognizing we are at war, be active in the spreading of the gospel, the furthering of God's people, God's kingdom. Because trouble has always come, and it will come again. Another reason we look at a prophecy like this is we recognize that God never loses or relinquishes control. Sometimes we see things that are going on, even in our current news system. We could look at what's going on over in Israel and we could say, oh, that's terrible. Why doesn't God step in and do something? Has He lost control? The answer is no. The devil is always at work, and there's always going to be a war raging. He's always going to be slick. He's always going to be sly. He's always going to be cunning. He's always going to be patient. But he's never going to win. He's always going to be defeated. God is on an eternal throne. He sits in the heavens and He laughs at all the chaos happening down here because He'll never relinquish and He'll never be defeated. He wants us to see history way back there from Daniel and see that time and time and time again, He never loses control. He's always in charge. He always wins. When we look to the future, He never loses control. He never relinquishes powers. He always wins. He is the great I Am. The God who was, is the God who is the God who always will be. We look at prophecies and recognize God is sovereign. And then the third thing we recognize is that prophecies like Daniel 8 remind us that there is a need for us to be ready. In one night, Babylon fell. Do you remember that? Daniel chapter 5, handwriting on the wall, that night, Babylon fell. Haman, with great speed in the book of Esther, dupes the king with smooth talk, the promise of money. An edict is written out. The king has signed it, sealed it, and it's in the law of the Medes and the Persians that cannot be taken away. With quickness and speed, there was the Holocaust of the Jews that was coming. Alexander the Great sweeps through the world with such speed that it seems as if his feet are not on the ground. Antiochus comes in and murders and marches into Jerusalem and abuses and just has change that happens within days. There is a quickness that comes. No one sees it coming on the way, and all of a sudden it's here, and boom, it happens. We don't know when the next Hitler will come. We don't know when the next Mussolini will be here. When he does, we can assume, we can know his coming is going to be subtle and his authority is going to be otherworldly. So are you ready? Not in terms of being physically ready, physically prepared. You know, I think there's a great emphasis on that right now. Physically prepared for the end. And you hear it on the radio. I kind of laugh at these commercials that you hear on the radio, but what are they doing? They're peddling food that lasts 25 years. You know what I'm talking about? Order now. I somewhat laugh at that, and if you're one that buys it, go enjoy it now, because, at least in my thinking, if we are living in a day and age where everything's dire, there's no food, and everyone's starving, when they find out you have food in your basement, you won't have food anymore. They're coming after you, and you won't have it long. So these commercials are getting you to buy all of their 25-year packages that you're not going to enjoy should things get really dire. So go eat your powdered ice cream now and just enjoy it while you still can. Some of that goes on with a push to buy gold. I mean, if paper money fails, you really think your gold's going to be lasting in your basement? I'm not talking about are you ready for Armageddon in a physical manner. Build your bunker, store your guns, get your ammunition, get your packets of food. Be ready if you want. But it's not the preparation physically that we have to be ready for. It's the spiritual preparation that we have to be ready for. Because when the Antichrist comes, the end is in sight. And Christ is coming in that day. And standing before Him is a whole lot more vitally important than if you have powdered ice cream. Because when Christ comes, He's going to be one that is going to deal with people both physically and spiritually. It's the Lord who tells us in Matthew chapter 10 that we don't need to fear those who can kill the body. We need to fear Him who's able to destroy the body and the soul. The only one who can do that is God. So are you spiritually ready to meet God? Do you know Christ is your Savior? Have you put off sin? And are you following Christ? Or do you love your sin more than you love God? It's going to come quickly. In a day that we don't know. These prophecies tell us they're going to be horrible. So are you ready? Are you a child of God, adopted into His family, faithfully serving Him? If you're not sure about that, find me. Find one of our pastors, find one of our members. We really would like to take the Bible and help you realize that this life is temporal, but there is an eternal life coming. And Christ Jesus gives us that hope to peace. Your greatest assurance, peace of God, your peace in soul, comes through Christ alone. Are you ready? If you are, keep serving. Keep looking to the Lord. Keep looking to Him. And our cry can be, Lord, come quickly. But while He waits, are you giving the gospel? So often we feel as if we get lulled into the patient, peaceful times that we exist. Oh, we don't need to give the gospel today or tomorrow because I can do that the next day. Are you faithful? Giving the gospel, serving Christ, helping people see there is a need to know Him. May the Lord help us to keep being faithful, to keep growing and feeding in His words, that we might find the help we need in times of trial, assurance and guidance for life today as we anticipate the life to come. May the Lord help us to keep growing, staying faithful to Him. He's coming. When He comes, that is the hour of trouble that will be too late for your neighbor. It'll be too late for your relative. It'll be too late for your coworker. Be faithful. Be burdened about the gospel to them while they still have time. May the Lord help us to be faithful.